Our second type of factoring is factoring by grouping, which results directly from kind of that last example we saw on the previous video, the GCF with a binomial instead of a GCF with a monomial. Remember, a binomial has two terms, so looking at my first example here, I've got the binomial g minus 3 and the binomial 2g plus 7. So the way that I'm going to distribute this is going to look a lot different than the way you're used to distributing, but it's the same concept, and it's going to lead into how we factor by grouping. So stay with me. If you're confused, just jot down a question and let me know in class. So I'm going to start by distributing the g from the first set of parentheses to the entire second binomial. So g times the quantity 2g plus 7. And then my second term is a minus 3, and I'm going to distribute that to the entire binomial, 2g plus 7. So when we look at what I have sitting here, this is very similar to that last example. I'm going to jump back to that one, the bottom of the screen here. We started with a binomial times a monomial in two different terms, and we factored that binomial out. So that's exactly how we factor by grouping. So our goal is to get, for example, this quadnomial means it has 4 terms, into something that looks like this, where it's got a common factor on both terms, and then we can finish factoring it back up to this. All right, I'm going to erase here some of my pointing out so we can kind of start over. All right, step 1, what we do is we are using greatest common factor, but instead of looking at every single term, we kind of split it up and we look at the first 2 terms for a GCF and the last 2 terms for a GCF. So I'm going to start here. I kind of break it up. The GCF of y cubed and negative 4y squared is there's no common numeric factor, and the smallest exponent on either of the variables is y squared, so that's my GCF. If I have y cubed or 3 y's and I pull out 2 of them, I have 1 y left. I've got my 4 left because I'm not dividing any numeric factors, and I pulled out both y's, so I have no y's left on my second term. And we do that again. What is the GCF, greatest common factor, of 2y and negative 8? And that would be a positive 2. 2y divided by 2 is y, 8 divided by 2 is 4. Now, if what's left doesn't have a common factor, let's say I had a y squared times y minus 4 for my first term, and a 2 times y plus 4 for my second term, then I would be done. There's nothing else I can do to factor unless I can somehow factor out that negative sign and make them match. But if you don't have a common factor, then you can't keep factoring. I do have a common factor. Remember, I only have 2 terms here. This is term 1, and this is term 2. So sitting on both of those terms is a y minus 4. That is the common factor. When I cancel that from my first term, I have y squared left. When I divide that out or cancel it from my second term, I have a plus 2 left. Again, I'm going to show you that this does work to get us back what we started with. We can always check our answer when we factor. And this time I'm going to distribute a little bit more normally the way you're used to. So I'm going to do y times y squared gives us y cubed. Y times 2 gives us 2y. Negative 4 times y squared. And negative 4 times 2. Now I have no like terms. It's not in standard form. I'd have to rearrange those middle 2 terms, but I do have a y cubed. I do have a negative 4y squared. I do have a positive 2 and a negative 8. So it is the same polynomial that I started with. Oh, sorry, I forgot my steps. So let's follow the steps for our second one. First step was to find the GCF of the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. Now on this one I need to be careful because my signs are in opposite orders. So I know that on my second two terms, I'm going to want to factor a negative out. Because remember, if those binomials don't match, you can't keep factoring. So for 8x to the fifth and 6x squared, I have a 2x squared as my GCF. Dividing that out, 8 divided by 2 is 4. X to the fifth divided by x squared is x cubed. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And x squared divided by x squared cancels. For my second two terms, I see that they have a 3 as a common factor, but I'm going to factor out a negative 3. Negative 12x cubed divided by negative 3 is positive 4x cubed. And 9 divided by negative 3 is negative 3. So looking at, again, my two terms, I only have two terms here. Now here's term 1, and here's term 2. So I'm on step 3, look for another GCF for the two terms you now have. My GCF now is 4x cubed minus 3. When I divide that out of my first term, I'm left with a 2x squared. Dividing it out of my second term, I have a negative 3.